Maria Thompson had always been a woman of quiet strength and unwavering determination. From the moment she stepped into nursing school as a young woman, she knew her path would not be easy, but it was one she felt called to walk. Her journey began in a small town where opportunities were scarce, especially for someone like her, a black woman with big dreams and limited resources. But Maria never let those challenges stop her. She worked tirelessly, juggling part-time jobs while studying late into the night. Her hands, though often tired from long shifts at hospitals or clinics, carried an unspoken promise to care for others with compassion and skill. Over 2 decades later, Maria stood as a testament to hard work paying off. She wasn't just any nurse. She was a trusted figure in her community, known for going above and beyond for her patients. Whether it was holding the hand of a frightened child during their first surgery or comforting grieving families after losing loved ones, Maria gave everything she had, and then some. To her, being a nurse wasn't just a job, it was a calling. It meant showing up when no one else could, staying calm under pressure, and finding ways to bring comfort even in the darkest moments. And through it all, there was one constant companion that remained by her side: her scrubs. To Maria, her scrubs weren't just pieces of fabric stitched together. They were more than that. They symbolized who she was and what she stood for. Every stain on them told a story: a life saved, a wound cleaned, a fever brought down. The deep navy blue color represented stability and trust, qualities she believed every patient deserved from their caregivers. These uniforms had seen her through sleepless nights, emotional breakdowns, and triumphant victories. They were practical, yes, but they also held meaning. For Maria, wearing her scrubs was akin to wearing armor. It reminded her why she chose this profession and kept her grounded in its purpose. One day, however, Maria found herself stepping out of her usual environment. A medical malpractice lawsuit involving one of her former patients required her testimony in court. She had never been inside a courtroom before, and the idea made her nervous. Still, she prepared carefully, ensuring her knowledge of the case was thorough. When it came to deciding what to wear, Maria didn't think twice. She picked out her crispest pair of navy blue scrubs, the same ones she wore every day at work. To her, this outfit wasn't just appropriate, it was authentic. It reflected who she was and what she did best. On the morning of the trial, Maria arrived early, clutching her notes tightly in her hands. As she entered the grand, imposing courtroom, she couldn't help but feel intimidated. The room buzzed with activity. Lawyers shuffling papers, witnesses whispering nervously, and spectators craning their necks to see what would happen next. The judge sat high above everyone else, his expression stern and unreadable. Maria took her seat among the other attendees, trying to steady her nerves. She reminded herself that she was here to tell the truth, nothing more and nothing less. When her name was finally called, Maria rose confidently and approached the witness stand. She answered the bailiff's questions about swearing to tell the truth, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Then, as she settled into the chair, something unexpected happened. Before she could utter a single word about the case, the judge looked directly at her and frowned. His gaze traveled slowly from her face down to her scrubs, lingering on them in a way that immediately set off alarm bells in Maria's mind. She braced herself, unsure of what was coming next, but certain that whatever it was wouldn't be pleasant. What Maria didn't realize yet was that this moment would test not only her professionalism, but also her resolve. Little did she know, the events unfolding in this courtroom would leave a lasting impact, not just on her, but on everyone present. As the judge opened his mouth to speak, Maria squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. The courtroom was eerily quiet as Maria sat in the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The judge's expression had shifted from neutral to one of clear disapproval. His eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. For a moment it seemed like he might simply move on and allow her to begin her testimony. But then, without warning, his voice cut through the silence, sharp and biting. "Ms. Thompson," he began, his tone laced with disdain, Is this how you show respect for the court? Surely someone of your experience knows better than to appear before us looking, well, like that. He gestured vaguely toward her scrubs, his words hanging heavily in the air. The room froze. Every eye turned to Maria, waiting to see how she would respond. Even the lawyers who moments ago had been scribbling notes furiously paused to take in the scene unfolding before them. Maria felt her stomach drop. She hadn't expected this kind of reception. Not here, not now. Her mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. Was he really criticizing her for wearing the very uniform that defined her profession? The same uniform she wore every day while saving lives, comforting families, and working tirelessly to make a difference? It wasn't just about the clothes. It felt personal, as if he were dismissing everything she stood for simply because of what she chose to wear. As the weight of his words settled over her, Maria couldn't help but feel a pang of anger, mixed with frustration. This wasn't the first time she'd faced judgment based on appearances, but something about this moment stung more deeply than usual. Perhaps it was the setting, the formal, imposing courtroom, or perhaps it was the way his comment carried, an undertone of superiority, as though her scrubs somehow made her less worthy of being taken seriously. Whatever it was, it struck a nerve. The audience watched intently, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh nervously or remain silent. Others looked down at their laps, avoiding eye contact. Altogether, no one dared to speak up. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to slice through. Even the bailiff, usually stoic and unflappable, seemed uneasy, his gaze flickering between the judge and Maria, as though anticipating what might come next. For Maria, this moment felt painfully familiar. Throughout her career, she'd encountered similar situations where people questioned her choices, whether it was her decision to work long hours despite the toll it took on her body, or her insistence on advocating for patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. There had been times when colleagues dismissed her opinions because of her race, assuming she lacked the expertise or authority to contribute meaningfully. There had been other instances when patients or their families treated her differently, often unconsciously due to biases they didn't even realize they held. Each of these experiences had left its mark, chipping away at her confidence little by little. Yet each time Maria found a way to push back against the negativity, drawing strength from her purpose and her passion for helping others. But this situation felt different. Here she was, standing, or rather sitting, in front of a room full of strangers being judged not for her skills or knowledge but for something as trivial as her attire. It wasn't just insulting, it was demeaning. And worse still, it reinforced the very stereotypes she had spent her entire life trying to overcome. As much as she wanted to defend herself right then and there, she knew she had to tread carefully. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about setting an example, for herself, for her community, and for anyone else who might find themselves in a similar position someday. Taking a deep breath, Maria forced herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. Instead, she focused on maintaining her composure, channeling the same patience and resilience that had gotten her through countless difficult days in the hospital. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the witness chair, grounding her. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she refused to let it show. If anything, she told herself, this was an opportunity, a chance to prove that she was more than capable of handling adversity with grace and dignity. Meanwhile, the judge waited, his expression unreadable. Whether he expected her to crumble under the pressure or offer a meek apology, Maria couldn't say. But one thing was certain. Whatever response she gave would leave a lasting impression, not only on him, but on everyone else in the room. The seal. Seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maria raised her head and met the judge's gaze directly. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady and strong. "Your Honor," she began, her tone measured yet firm. "These scrubs represent years of service, Long nights, early mornings, and sacrifices made to care for people when they're at their most vulnerable. She paused briefly, allowing her words to sink in. I wear them with pride because they remind me why I chose this path. If my attire seems out of place here today, perhaps it's worth considering whether we value appearances over substance. Her statement hung in the air. Simple, yet powerful. The room remained silent, the collective breath of everyone present suspended in anticipation. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. All eyes were on Maria now, watching, as she sat tall and unwavering, refusing to back down. In that instant, she became more than just a nurse testifying in court. She became a symbol of quiet defiance, a reminder that true professionalism isn't defined by outward appearances, but by the values and dedication one brings to their work. And, though she couldn't have known it at the time, her words would spark a conversation far beyond the confines of that courtroom. A conversation about respect, bias, and the unseen battles fought daily by those whose contributions often go unrecognized. Maria's words echoed softly in the courtroom, but their impact was anything but quiet. For a moment it felt as though the entire room had been frozen in time. The judge, who just moments ago had seemed so sure of himself, now appeared uncertain. His sharp gaze softened slightly, and his lips parted as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Even the lawyers, who were usually quick to interject or redirect attention, sat silently, their pens resting motionless on their notepads. It was as though Maria's response had knocked the air out of the room and replaced it with something heavier, more profound. For Maria, this wasn't just about defending her choice of clothing. It was about addressing something deeper, something that had followed her throughout her life and career. She knew all too well what it meant to be judged not for what she did, but for how she looked, sounded, or carried herself. Growing up, she'd faced comments about her ambitions being too big for someone like her. In school, teachers sometimes doubted whether she could keep up with the rigorous demands of nursing programs. And later, as a professional, colleagues and even patients occasionally questioned her authority simply because of the color of her skin or the way she spoke. These experiences weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern, one that many Black women and other marginalized individuals encountered daily, whether it was subtle remarks disguised as compliments, "You're so articulate," or outright dismissals of their expertise. These moments added up over time. They chipped away at confidence, made people second-guess themselves, and forced them to work twice as hard to prove they belonged. But Maria had learned early on that giving in to self-doubt wasn't an option. If anything, those challenges only fueled her determination to succeed. Sitting in that courtroom chair, Maria reflected on all the times she'd been underestimated and how she'd risen above it every single time. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent perfecting her craft, studying late into the night while others slept. She remembered the days when she'd gone without breaks during grueling shifts, ensuring her patients received the care they needed. And she recalled the moments when she'd stood firm in the face of criticism, refusing to let anyone diminish her contributions. This moment felt eerily similar to those past experiences, yet there was something different about it. Here, in this formal setting where justice was supposed to prevail, she was being asked to justify not her actions but her identity, the very essence of who she was. The weight of the judge's earlier comment came rushing back to her. His words hadn't just criticized her scrubs, they implied that her appearance somehow made her less credible, less worthy of respect. To him, perhaps, her uniform symbolized informality or a lack of seriousness. But to Maria, it represented everything opposite. It embodied dedication, sacrifice, and years of relentless effort. How could someone who had never walked in her shoes understand what those scrubs truly meant? How could they grasp the emotional toll of losing a patient or the exhaustion of working double shifts to ensure coverage? These were things you couldn't see by looking at someone's clothes, but they mattered deeply. As Maria processed these thoughts, she realized something crucial. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or undervalued because of biases they couldn't control. It was about the young nurses coming up behind her, hoping to break barriers and make a difference in the world. It was about the patients who trusted her implicitly, knowing she would always put their needs first. And it was about the broader fight against systemic inequities that persisted in workplaces, courtrooms, and communities across the country. Her mind flashed back to a particular incident from years ago, a memory she rarely revisited, but one that lingered in the corners of her consciousness. Early in her career, she'd been assigned to assist a senior doctor during a high-stakes surgery. Despite her qualifications and preparation, the doctor had openly questioned her competence in front of the entire team. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" he'd asked, his tone dripping with condescension. At the time, Maria had swallowed her pride and focused on the task at hand, proving her abilities through flawless execution. But the sting of that moment stayed with her, reminding her that no matter how skilled or knowledgeable she became, some people would always find reasons to doubt her. Now sitting in the courtroom, Maria recognized that this situation wasn't so different. The judge's critique wasn't just about her scrubs, it was rooted in the same biases that had haunted her throughout her life. Yet, instead of feeling defeated, she felt a surge of resolve. This was her chance to speak not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Her voice could become a bridge, connecting her personal struggles to a larger conversation about fairness and equality. Taking another deep breath, Maria allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought about her parents, who had worked tirelessly to provide for their family despite limited opportunities. She thought about her mentors, who had encouraged her to pursue her dreams even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And she thought about her patients whose lives she had touched in ways both big and small. These people, and countless others, had shaped her into the person she was today. They had taught her resilience, humility, and the importance of standing up for what was right. With renewed clarity, Maria prepared herself to continue. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be skeptics, critics, and doubters. But she also knew that her truth was powerful, and that sometimes speaking it aloud was enough to plant seeds of change. As she glanced around the courtroom, she noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Some spectators nodded almost imperceptibly, while others exchanged thoughtful glances. Even the judge, who had started this exchange with such certainty, now seemed unsure of himself. Though Maria couldn't predict exactly how this moment would unfold, she knew one thing for sure. She had already made an impact. And so, with quiet strength and unwavering conviction, Maria readied herself to deliver the rest of her testimony. Not just as a nurse, but as a woman determined to challenge the status quo and inspire others to do the same. Maria's voice, though calm and measured, carried a weight that seemed to fill every corner of the courtroom. Her initial response had already left an impression, but she wasn't done yet. With her hands resting firmly on the edge of the witness chair, she leaned forward just slightly, her posture open yet resolute. She wanted to make sure everyone, especially the judge, understood the depth of what she was saying. This wasn't just about scrubs or court attire. It was about respect, recognition, and the unseen battles people like her fought every single day. "Your Honor," Maria continued, her tone steady but imbued with quiet strength. "I understand that appearances matter in settings like this. Courts are places of order, tradition, and formality, and I respect that deeply. But I also believe that respect goes beyond what we see on the surface. These scrubs may not look like a suit or a dress, but they represent something far greater than fabric or style." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in before continuing. "They represent years of sacrifice, late nights, and early mornings. They represent the countless lives I've touched and the families I've supported during their most difficult moments. To me, these scrubs aren't just clothes. They're a symbol of my commitment to serving others." As she spoke, Maria's gaze shifted briefly across the room, meeting the eyes of spectators, lawyers, and even the bailiff. She wanted them to feel the sincerity behind her words, to understand that this wasn't about defiance or making a scene. It was about truth. Every syllable she uttered was deliberate, chosen carefully to convey both her professionalism and her humanity. Her voice softened slightly as she added, "When I put on these scrubs each day, I'm reminded of why I chose this path. I think about the patients who trust me with their lives, the children who smile at me despite their pain, and the elderly who share stories of resilience and hope. My uniform connects me to those experiences, and I wear it proudly because it reflects the heart of my work." The judge, who had initially seemed unshakable in his critique, now appeared visibly affected. His earlier confidence wavered as he listened to Maria's words, his expression shifting from disapproval to something closer to contemplation. He adjusted his glasses and glanced down at his notes, perhaps searching for a way to respond without undermining the gravity of the moment. For someone accustomed to maintaining authority, this was unfamiliar territory. Maria's eloquence and composure had disrupted the usual dynamic of the courtroom, forcing everyone, including him, to reconsider their assumptions. Meanwhile, the audience remained utterly captivated. Some leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word Maria said, while others exchanged glances, nodding subtly in agreement. Even the opposing counsel, who likely expected this testimony to be routine, seemed taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. There was a collective understanding dawning in the room. This wasn't just another legal proceeding. It was a moment of reckoning, a challenge to the biases and stereotypes that often went unspoken, but lingered nonetheless. Maria pressed on, her voice growing firmer as she addressed the broader implications of the judge's comment. "If my appearance today seems out of place, perhaps it's worth asking ourselves why that is. Why do we value certain types of clothing over others? Why does wearing a suit automatically command respect, while a uniform like mine, a uniform earned through years of hard work and dedication, is seen as less appropriate?" She let the question hang in the air, allowing it to resonate with everyone present. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "It's not just about me or my scrubs. It's about how we treat people whose roles and contributions might look different from what we expect. Are we judging them based on their actions and intentions, or are we letting preconceived notions cloud our judgment?" Her final statement struck a chord, not just in the courtroom, but within herself. As she spoke, Maria felt a sense of liberation, a realization that she wasn't just defending her choice of attire. She was advocating for a more inclusive, empathetic way of seeing the world. She thought about all the times she'd been underestimated, dismissed or overlooked because of her race, gender, or profession. Those memories could have weighed her down, but instead they fueled her determination to push back against injustice, no matter how small or subtle it might seem. For a few seconds after Maria finished speaking, the courtroom was completely silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the air itself is holding its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the entire room needed a moment to process what had just transpired. The judge sat motionless, his pen hovering above, his notepad unused. Lawyers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to break the tension or let it linger. Spectators, too, remained still, their expressions ranging from admiration to discomfort. Finally, the judge cleared his throat, breaking the spell. He adjusted his position in his chair, looking directly at Maria for the first time since her testimony began. "Point taken, Ms. Thompson," he said, his voice noticeably softer than before. "You may proceed." Though his words were simple, they carried a hint of acknowledgement, a tacit admission that he had misjudged her. Whether intentional or not, his tone suggested a shift, however slight, in his perspective. But Maria knew that this moment wasn't really about him, or even about her. It was about planting seeds of change in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. As she settled back into the witness chair, preparing to answer the lawyer's questions, she couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts around her. Some spectators smiled faintly at her, offering nods of encouragement. Others scribbled notes, perhaps jotting down her words for later reflection. Even the opposing counsel, who had initially seemed skeptical, now appeared more attentive, listening closely to her answers. Maria's testimony continued smoothly from that point onward, but the energy in the room had changed. What had started as a tense confrontation had transformed into something else entirely. a shared experience that challenged assumptions and opened doors to new ways of thinking. For Maria, it was a reminder of the power of authenticity and courage. By staying true to herself and speaking her truth, she had turned what could have been a humiliating moment into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for everyone involved. As the trial progressed, Maria's words lingered in the minds of those present. They sparked conversations outside the courtroom, whispered exchanges between colleagues and strangers alike. Some praised her poise and professionalism, while others reflected on the deeper issues her response had raised. Regardless of their perspectives, one thing was clear. Maria's reply had brought the room to its feet, not literally but emotionally, and in doing so, she had proven that sometimes the simplest truths can leave the most lasting impression. As the trial continued, Maria's testimony unfolded with the same clarity and poise that had marked her earlier response to the judge. She answered each question thoughtfully, her words grounded in both fact and compassion. Her expertise shone through as she explained complex medical procedures in simple terms, ensuring that even those unfamiliar with healthcare could follow along. Despite the initial tension, the atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift, not just because of what Maria said, but how she said it. Her calm demeanor and unwavering professionalism commanded respect, slowly eroding any lingering doubts about her credibility. The opposing counsel, who had initially seemed eager to challenge her, found themselves struggling to poke holes in her statements. Every attempt to undermine her authority was met with a composed rebuttal, delivered without arrogance or defensiveness. Instead, Maria leaned into her role as an educator, patiently breaking down misconceptions and clarifying details when needed. It became evident to everyone present that this wasn't just a nurse testifying. It was someone who deeply understood their craft and cared enough to share that knowledge with others. Even the skeptical glances from spectators softened over time, replaced by nods of acknowledgement and quiet murmurs of approval. But while Maria's testimony moved forward seamlessly, the ripple effects of her earlier exchange with the judge continued to spread throughout the room. People whispered among themselves during breaks, discussing not only the case but also the powerful moment that had occurred at its outset. Some expressed admiration for Maria's courage, marveling at how she had stood up to authority without raising her voice or losing her composure. Others reflected on the broader implications of her words, particularly her challenge to societal biases about appearance and professionalism. The conversation spilled beyond the courtroom walls, carried out into hallways and courtyards where attendees gathered between sessions. One group of spectators, 2 young women interning at a local law firm, found themselves engrossed in animated discussion outside the building. "Did you see how she handled that?" one of them asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "She didn't back down, but she wasn't aggressive either. It was perfect." Her friend nodded enthusiastically, adding, "And what she said about judging people based on appearances, it really made me think. Like, why do we assume certain clothes mean someone is less qualified? That doesn't make sense." Their conversation drew the attention of an older man nearby, a retired teacher who had come to observe the trial out of curiosity. He joined in, his voice warm yet reflective. "You know, moments like these remind us how important it is to question our assumptions," he said. "We all carry biases whether we realize it or not. But when someone points them out so clearly, it forces us to stop and reconsider. That nurse today? She did more than defend herself. She gave everyone here something to think about." Inside the courtroom, similar reflections were taking place. A reporter covering the trial scribbled furiously in her notebook, capturing not only the facts of the case but also the human element. The way Maria's presence had transformed the dynamics of the room. Later, she would write about how Maria's testimony transcended the legal proceedings, sparking discussions about workplace dress codes, implicit bias, and systemic inequities. Another lawyer in attendance, a seasoned professional known for his stoic demeanor, admitted privately to a colleague that he'd been moved by Maria's response. "It takes guts to call out prejudice like that," he said quietly. "Especially in front of a judge. I'll remember this day for a long time." Even the judge, whose critique had sparked the entire exchange, seemed subtly changed by the experience. Though he maintained his formal demeanor, there was a noticeable softening in his interactions with Maria as the trial progressed. His questions became more measured, almost cautious, as if he were mindful of avoiding another misstep. Whether intentional or subconscious, this shift signaled a small but significant victory, not just for Maria, but for anyone who had ever felt dismissed because of their appearance or background. By the time the trial concluded, Maria's impact extended far beyond the verdict itself. As she stepped down from the witness stand and exited the courtroom, she couldn't help but notice the look she received from those around her. Some offered smiles of encouragement, while others simply watched her with expressions of quiet admiration. One woman approached her hesitantly, extending her hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you said in there. It meant a lot." Maria accepted the gesture graciously, offering a warm smile in return. "I'm just doing my job," she replied humbly. Yet deep down, she knew it was more than that. This wasn't just about fulfilling her duty as a witness. It was about using her platform to advocate for change, however small. And though she hadn't sought recognition, she recognized the importance of standing up for herself and others in moments like these. Word of Maria's powerful exchange in court quickly spread beyond the confines of the courtroom. Within hours, snippets of her testimony began circulating online, shared by observers who had been struck by her eloquence and conviction. Social media platforms lit up with posts praising her courage, with hashtags like "Respect Her Work" and "More Than Scrubs" trending locally. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers chimed in, sharing stories of their own experiences with bias and discrimination. For many, Maria's words resonated deeply, reminding them of the ongoing fight for equality and fairness in all areas of life. Back at the hospital, news of Maria's courtroom encounter reached her co-workers before she returned to work. When she walked through the doors the next morning, she was greeted with applause, a spontaneous show of support from nurses, doctors, and administrative staff alike. "We're proud of you," one of her colleagues said, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't just represent yourself, you represented all of us." Though Maria brushed off the praise modestly, she couldn't deny the warmth it brought her. Heart. In that moment, surrounded by the people she worked alongside every day, she felt a profound sense of solidarity. Yet despite the outpouring of admiration, Maria remained focused on what truly mattered: her patience. As she slipped back into her scrubs and resumed her duties, she reminded herself that her purpose hadn't changed. She was still the same nurse who showed up day after day, ready to care for those in need. The courtroom incident hadn't altered her commitment to her work. It had simply reinforced it. If anything, it had strengthened her resolve to keep pushing boundaries, challenging stereotypes, and advocating for a world where everyone was judged not by their appearance, but by their actions and intentions. In the days that followed, Maria received messages from people she'd never met, students, professionals, and community leaders inspired by her story. Many thanked her for speaking truth to power, while others shared how her words had encouraged them to confront their own biases and strive for greater inclusivity in their workplaces. One letter, written by a young nursing student, stood out. In particular, "Your courage gives me hope," the student wrote. "I want to be like you someday, someone who stands up for what's right, no matter what." Reading those words, Maria felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the support she'd received, but for the opportunity to inspire others. She realized that her response to the judge hadn't just been a personal triumph, it had become a catalyst for meaningful conversations about respect, representation, and justice. And while she knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges, she took comfort in knowing she wasn't walking it alone. Together, with others who shared her vision, she could continue to break barriers and create a more equitable world, one step, one word, and one act of courage at a time. In the weeks that followed her testimony, Maria returned to the rhythm of her life, at least on the surface. Her days were filled with the same routines: early mornings at the hospital, long hours tending to patients, and late nights reviewing charts or catching up on administrative tasks. To anyone observing from the outside, it might have seemed like nothing had changed. But for Maria, the courtroom incident lingered in her mind, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the power of standing up for oneself. She carried the memory of that day with her, tucked away like a small flame inside, a source of quiet strength she could draw upon whenever doubt crept in. At work, her colleagues treated her with even greater admiration than before. Some joked about calling her the courtroom queen, while others approached her more seriously, seeking advice on how to handle situations where they felt undervalued or dismissed. One young nurse in particular confided in Maria during a rare break between shifts. "I don't know how you stayed so calm under pressure like that," the nurse said, her voice tinged with awe. "If someone said something like that to me, I'd probably lose it." Maria chuckled softly, leaning back against the nurse's station counter. "Trust me, it wasn't easy," she admitted. "For a moment, I thought my heart was going to beat right out of my chest, but here's the thing: you can't let fear stop you from saying what needs to be said. Sometimes all it takes is one person speaking up to make everyone else realize there's a problem worth addressing." Her words resonated deeply with the younger nurse, who nodded thoughtfully. "You're right," she replied. "It's just hard, you know? Like you want to believe people will judge you based on your work, but then moments like that happen, and it feels like no matter what you do, some people won't see past the surface." Maria placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's exactly why we have to keep showing up every single day. We may not change everyone's minds overnight, but if we stay true to ourselves, we plant seeds, and those seeds grow over time, sometimes in ways we don't even expect." The ripple effects of Maria's courtroom response continued to spread far beyond her immediate circle. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a moment of empowerment and resilience. Articles highlighted not only her eloquent rebuttal to the judge, but also the broader issues of bias and representation in professional settings. Readers flooded comment sections with their thoughts, sharing personal anecdotes and discussing the need for greater inclusivity across industries. For many, Maria's story became a symbol of hope, a testament to the idea that speaking truth to power could spark meaningful change. Social media played a significant role in amplifying her message. Videos of her testimony, recorded discreetly by spectators, went viral, garnering thousands of views and shares. Hashtags like "Minders Respect Her Work" and "Are More Than Scrubs" trended regionally, drawing attention to the often overlooked contributions of healthcare workers and other professionals whose uniforms didn't fit traditional notions of professionalism. Influencers and activists joined the conversation, using their platforms to amplify Maria's voice and encourage others to challenge stereotypes wherever they encountered them. One particularly impactful post came from a well-known advocate for workplace equality. In a lengthy thread, the activist praised Maria's courage and urged followers to reflect on how societal norms shaped their perceptions of professionalism. "Why do we associate respectability with suits and ties?" the post read. "Why does wearing scrubs, or any uniform tied to service roles, make someone seem less credible? These biases aren't harmless. They perpetuate inequality and undermine the dignity of hardworking individuals. Let's learn from stories like Maria's and commit to doing better." The public discourse surrounding Maria's experience inspired tangible action in unexpected places. Hospitals and clinics began revisiting their policies on workplace attire, ensuring that employees weren't penalized for wearing uniforms that reflected their roles. Law firms and corporate offices hosted workshops on implicit bias, encouraging staff to examine their own assumptions about appearance and professionalism. Educators incorporated Maria's story into classroom discussions, teaching students about the importance of empathy, advocacy, and standing up for marginalized voices. For Maria, however, the real victory lay not in the headlines or hashtags, but in the quieter, more personal victories that unfolded in her daily life. Strangers approached her at grocery stores and coffee shops, thanking her for being brave enough to speak out. Parents told her how they planned to share her story with their children as an example of integrity and perseverance. Even former patients reached out, expressing gratitude not just for her care, but for her willingness to fight for respect on behalf of everyone in her field. Despite the newfound attention, Maria remained steadfastly humble. She never sought recognition or accolades. Her goal had always been to serve others to the best of her ability. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of fulfillment that came from knowing her actions had made a difference, even if only in small ways. Each kind word, each gesture of support, reinforced her belief that staying true to oneself was one of the most powerful things anyone could do. As months passed, Maria found herself reflecting on the legacy she hoped to leave behind, not just as a nurse, but as a person. She wanted to be remembered not for the challenges she faced, but for how she responded to them. She envisioned a future where no one had to justify their worth based on what they wore or how they looked, a world where people were valued for their character, their dedication, and their contributions to society. To that end, Maria took steps to ensure her impact would endure long after the spotlight faded. She started mentoring young nurses, offering guidance not only on clinical skills, but also on navigating the complexities of professional environments. She encouraged them to embrace their unique identities, reminding them that authenticity was a strength, not a weakness. She also joined local advocacy groups focused on promoting diversity and inclusion in healthcare, lending her voice to initiatives aimed at dismantling systemic barriers. On a personal level, Maria made a conscious effort to celebrate the small victories, the moments when a patient smiled despite their pain, when a colleague expressed gratitude for her support, or when a stranger recognized her and shared how her story had inspired them. These moments reminded her that change didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it happened quietly, one interaction at a time. Looking back on the courtroom incident years later, Maria saw it not as a defining moment, but as part of a larger journey, one marked by resilience, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice. She understood that the fight against bias and inequality was ongoing, requiring patience, persistence, and collective effort. But she also knew that every step forward mattered, no matter how small. In the end, Maria's legacy wasn't about the words she spoke in that courtroom. It was about the lives she touched through her actions, both big and small. It was about the countless patients who trusted her with their care, the colleagues who admired her for her strength, and the strangers who found hope in her story. Through it all, she remained a beacon of quiet determination, proving that true professionalism wasn't defined by appearances but by the values one lived by. And so, whether she was tending to a sick child, comforting a grieving family, or simply walking down the street in her scrubs, Maria carried herself with the same pride and purpose that had brought the courtroom to its feet that fateful day. Because, for her, it had never been about making a statement. It had always been about living authentically, serving wholeheartedly, and inspiring others to do the same.